let's talk about ads, okay? And these are going to be paid ads. So paid advertisements. Again, we need volume coming through the recruiting process. Based on the numbers that we talked about earlier, you need at least 50 and sometimes up to 100 applications coming through the recruiting process to have the end result of just getting one rep into onboarding, and that doesn't include your attrition rates. So again, if you need 5 reps into onboarding to get one to stick, well, you probably need 250 to 500 applications coming through the recruiting process, which means you're screening through hundreds of people. So from an advertisement perspective, one of the most important things at the beginning is volume. And so it's not always easy to create volume, and so you have to get a little bit creative. What's really cool, if your opportunity is like ours and it's remote opportunities are incredibly easy to create volume. And when I say remote, by the way, I don't mean actually work from home. So this is work from home and or in the field anywhere in the country. So as an example, SRU, Sales Recruiting University, I will hire appointment setters or closers to work from home anywhere in the United States. I don't care where they're from, they can work anywhere in the country. And so it's not just work from home, because some work from home opportunities, you want to hire them locally to very specific markets. That's not what I mean for the sake of illustration in this training. Remote, I mean anywhere in the country. So it's easier for remote opportunities because of the geography and the size of population that we're actually advertising to. So as an example, internally within our business, we have a high ticket sales representative position, which is our closer role, and we have a setter role, which we call a sales development representative. So sales development representative, which is the setter position, and the closer position, which we call internally the high ticket sales representative. Now from an advertisement perspective, because volume is so easy to create for remote opportunities, that's literally all I have to advertise is a high ticket sales representative position when I'm hiring for the closer position. And if I'm hiring for the setting position, all I need to advertise for is a sales development representative role. And just based on those 2 titles alone and it being remote, the volume is crazy, and therefore it's fairly easy for me to hit my recruiting goals, contrary to maybe if I was just hiring locally in Salt Lake City as an example. Now for the same opportunity, if I was hiring only in Salt Lake City, which means I'm advertising to only Salt Lake City versus remote, well, obviously my population opportunity decreases exponentially. It goes from the entire US down to 500,000 people potentially that could apply. And that's just assuming all the people that actually live in Salt Lake County. So if I was needing to recruit volume and I needed volume on the front end in my recruiting process, and I was only able to advertise in Salt Lake City, well, from our perspective, you have to get creative from there from an advertising perspective to get the volume that you need. So as an example, if I'm hiring for the closer position, which we would advertise typically remote as a high ticket sales representative closer opportunity, and I'm only now hiring in Salt Lake City, well, I'm not going to get a lot of volume, and therefore I'm going to get a little bit creative, and maybe I'll advertise to other opportunities like senior account executive or independent sales associate or senior inside sales representative or recruiting sales consultant. And these diverse recruiting titles, job descriptions, and sometimes differences in income ranges ultimately make the top of the funnel from a lead generation perspective much higher, because I have candidates applying in all sorts of different ways, and I'm funneling all of those people into the screening and scheduling process I'll go through here in a few minutes, pumping those people into a group interview and ultimately presenting one opportunity. But the creativity from an advertising perspective allowed me to get the volume that I need to actually hit my end result from a recruiting standpoint. Hopefully this is making sense. Now to use the sales development representative example, which is our internal appointment setting position, if I'm only hiring locally to Salt Lake City, I'm probably advertising for appointment setter, sales development representative, entry-level sales representative, and business development associate. And because of the increase in titles and job descriptions and the different ways to create leads coming into the recruiting process, I'm now increasing my volume of applications coming through the recruiting process versus if I were only using one title. And therefore I actually have a chance to hit my end recruiting result because I got the volume in the first place, which again is absolutely necessary when building a commission-based sales team. Now it's important for you to understand a few things. You have remote, you have localized, and you have multi-location. Now we just did an example of the remote. I talked through that with you on our sales development representative and our high ticket sales representative role. I translated that to a localized opportunity where we use Salt Lake City as the example, and I said, hey, now that we don't have the national population to make recruiting volume easy for us on the front end from an ads perspective, and we're switching the same opportunities to recruiting locally in Salt Lake City, here's how I would think about the ad strategy to ensure that I have the volume. We talked about that. Well, the last thing that we maybe see is opportunities that are multi-location. So as an example, we help tons of roofing, solar, home improvement companies all over the country, and they typically have 1 to multiple locations across the country. And it's important in these situations that you don't get too crazy from a title perspective. So as an example, let's say that I'm a solar company in Salt Lake City, and I'm only hiring locally in this market, and it's an outside door-to-door sales opportunity. Well, I'm probably going to have like 4-ish ad titles like solar sales representative, outside sales representative, field sales consultant, independent sales associate, and maybe entry-level sales representative, right? So typically specific specific industry ads, and then on top of that, sales model specific type advertisements, if this is making sense. And I would advertise those or a variation of those in Salt Lake City to ensure I had decent volume so that I could actually hit my recruiting results. Well, if that same company had multiple locations and all of a sudden with their ad accounts, regardless of what ad account they're using, if they're starting to advertise similar opportunities in 2 to 3, 4, 5 different markets, and they're using 4 to 5 different titles in all those markets, well, you're starting to flag the accounts and you're starting to have issues with your ad platforms, if this is making sense. So when you scale to multiple locations with a localized opportunity, the goal is not to get too crazy from a title perspective, but you also need to get the volume. And so it kind of depends on how many locations that you have. But as an example, if I have that localized opportunity that's solar in Salt Lake City, and I'm managing 4 titles and I scale to 2 cities, well, I'm probably bringing that down to 3 titles. If I scale to 3+ cities, I'm probably scaling that down to 2 titles, and I'm trying to leverage as many titles as I can in the advertisement process to increase my lead volume, but I'm not getting too crazy with the ad platforms, because if you're leveraging them too much, they're going to get pissed and shut your stuff down, if that makes sense. But the creativity from an advertisement perspective is required to get the volume that you need. And again, the volume is absolutely required to get your goals. The last thing we didn't discuss over here, because it really aligns with the multi-location, is remote work from home. So not remote work all over the country, but remote work from home. So as an example, I'm in Salt Lake City. If I only wanted to hire people locally in Salt Lake City, well, they would be work from home remote. And so that would be kind of the localized advertisement strategy. If I were hiring people in multiple locations but work from home, as an example, Salt Lake City, Utah, Sacramento, California, and Chicago, Illinois, and that's 3 markets, well, my strategy would be really similar to the multi-location localized opportunities. Hopefully this is clear. So that's an overview of step 1. Again, it's about the advertisements. It's all about volume coming through the front end. And now let's dive into the screening and scheduling process. How do we make it actually simple to screen through hundreds of people and get the best people into step 3, which is actually the group interview? So for topic number 2, in terms of the screening and scheduling process, when I say screening, you can just think in terms of the background of the candidate. So at the beginning, we talked about the traditional recruiting method, and at least you need 50 applications coming in. And if 40% of those on paper seem worth pitching, then that's going to be 20 out of the 50. Sometimes these numbers, again, can be higher. Sometimes you need up to 75, 100 applications coming in to get 1 rep into onboarding. But in terms of screening and scheduling, what I mean here is just in terms of this example, opting out the 30, right? So 50 applications come in, I'm reviewing those. That's probably going to take 30 up to 60 minutes. And I'm taking 30 of those, 60% of those people out of the 50, leaving me with 20. And that's kind of what I mean by screening. And so scheduling is just taking the rest of the candidates and scheduling them into the group interview process, okay? And so this is really simple. This is just high volume administrative work. So the screening process, when I say screening and scheduling, the screening process, that's administrative work because I'm reviewing backgrounds of candidates and making judgments based off of that, not being too strict, which is something we'll talk about towards the end of the training. That's really important for you to understand. And then also the scheduling is just scheduling them into the group interview. Now, the administrative process in terms of scheduling them into the group interview, this is simply just outbound emails and outbound text messages, and then a group interview scheduling link. We use a tool called Calendly, and we set up a group interview scheduling link. You can cap that out based on if you have a face-to-face office that you're doing group interviews or doing your group interviews via Zoom, which is something we prefer because the show up rates are higher. But pretty much you have the candidates that come in. There's 50. You opt out 60% of those, maybe more. That leaves you with 20 people. And this is just kind of making the numbers make sense, assuming 1 rep into onboarding. And then you're taking those 20 people and doing outbound emails and texts with the group interview scheduling link. The candidate gets the link. They self-schedule into the group interview. Then they show up and go through the process that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. So step 2, the screening and scheduling process, although it's high volume administrative work and there's stuff to do there, it does take time. It's fairly simple in nature once you set up and implement the process and run it for a few weeks. Now, when it comes time to do the group interview, this is really your time to shine. So everything up to this point is fairly simple once it's set up and you understand how to operate it, right? Because the ads and the screening and scheduling process is just basic administrative work.